In Budget 2025, Mr. Speaker, we made generational investments to build communities, to empower Canadians, and to protect our country. Now the journey must continue. We do this by drawing on Canada's unique strengths and capabilities. We have the most educated workforce, Mr. Speaker, something we should all be proud of. Yes, we should applaud all our people, the strong people we have in Canada.
Finance Minister François Philippe Champagne delivering his spring economic update. Our next guest is someone who calls herself an eternal optimist. Her words, not mine. I saw her tweet this week. But despite that eternal optimism, she has some concerns about where Canada's economy is heading. And this spring economic update did not do much to quell those concerns. We head over now to Lucy Hargreaves, the CEO of Build Canada, who joins us now. Hi, Lucy. Welcome back to the program.
Hi, Elias. Thanks for having me.
As you wrote this week, as I follow you on Twitter, on X, you are a must follow, by the way, if you want to know more about where this country is headed. As you wrote, the more you sit with this week's economic update, the more concerned you get. Tell me why every time you think harder about it, it gets worse.
Yeah, look, I mean, I will always, as I said in my tweet, be the kind of person who wants to see the silver lining, who will look for those, pieces of hope in, whatever, whether it's our government or others in the country are doing. And so that is my approach for everything. Look, I mean, I don't think the spring economic update was all bad news. There were some things in there that were steps in the right direction and signals that this government is listening to innovators and entrepreneurs, things like this whole of government competition review, so there's some good signs in there. However, the more I sit with it and think about it, and the more I think about what our country needs to fundamentally tackle the productivity issues we have, there's still not that urgency and that action in this spring economic update to tackle those fundamental issues.
So this is what's concerning, right? There's not that urgency. And I'm like, well, if there's not urgency now, what will it take, right? So, I guess, are you grappling with that same question? Like, it would seem like now's the time to have some sort of sense of urgency.
Yeah, and this is what we've been looking for since, this government was elected in April is urgency. And the rhetoric coming from this government has always been that this is a crisis, this is an urgent moment, it's time to act fast and do things at a speed we have not seen in generations. And I think when you look at the politics of it, I can understand why it may have been challenging and difficult to do all of the things this government may have wanted to do in the last 12 months with a minority. And I think the spring economic update was that first opportunity to send a stronger signal to Canadians in a majority context that they're ready to, move quickly and move fast and make bold, hard choices. Of course, the timing of the spring economic update came very quickly after the majority was secured. And so, maybe this isn't the only opportunity. I think when I think about other signals I'd be looking for down the road, I think about Budget 2026, which will be the prime opportunity, I think, for this government to communicate how serious they are about things.
One of the things you wrote this week is that this government is falling into the trap on focusing on messaging and optics over outcomes. And then you hit them with this, claiming the new investment fund is a sovereign wealth fund when it's clearly not, is a prime example. Now, if the government's defending this, by the way, they're saying, no, it's a sovereign wealth fund. Why do you take issue with that messaging? Make the case to our listeners that it's not what they say it is.
Yeah, when you look at sovereign wealth funds around the world, so I'm talking about established sovereign wealth funds, you look at the top 10 around the world, there's big ones in Norway, Singapore, several Middle Eastern countries. These are the wealth funds that have trillions in assets, over 300 billion in Singapore's case with Temasek, and these funds are funded by one of kind of three pools of funding. They're either funded through resource revenues. So in the case of Norway's fund, it's funded by oil and gas royalties. They're funded by foreign exchange reserves. In the case of China, they have a couple of very significant sized sovereign wealth funds that are FX reserve funded. Or in the case of Singapore, for Temasek, they're funded through fiscal responsibility. So they're funded through budget surplus, along with a transfer of state-owned assets. Now, in the days after this was announced on Tuesday this week, the narrative has become a bit more clear that it seems like this government's intention may be to start selling Government of Canada stakes in state-owned assets like airports. That's becoming part of the conversation. And so maybe we will drift into that territory a bit more. But certainly with what was announced on Monday and Tuesday, that was not the headline. And having a sovereign, what they're calling a sovereign wealth fund, essentially an investment fund that is funded by $25 billion of debt from our taxpayers, is not what is typically understood to be a sovereign wealth fund around the world.
What's your take on why the level of debt that Canada has and how quickly it's growing? Make the case to our listeners about why that is such a bad thing. Because I think for many listeners, they're looking at some metrics that the government will point out. We had Mark Miller on the program in the last hour, and he was pointing, compared to the other G7 nations, we're actually quite low, on the debt to GDP ratio. And I know there's some funny business with numbers you can play on that metric. But make the case to our listeners that it's really serious right now, just how high our debt is and how fast it's growing.
Yeah, I mean, putting aside the fact that you can play around with debt to GDP ratios and make it look, better than it actually is, depending on what you include or exclude, let's not get into those details. But putting that aside, even if you just look at the interest payments that we are paying on our debt, any of your listeners, I'm sure, could relate to this as they are paying interest payments on their credit card or their mortgages. And for the Government of Canada, it's no different. When we have debt, we have to pay interest payments on that debt. And when you look at those interest payments, our debt is growing so quickly that the total amount of interest payments is expected to be $80 billion per year by 2030. $80 billion per year means that would be the fastest growing government program. So interest payments on our debt, which comes from choices we have made to spend more than we have, means that interest payments are the fastest growing government program.
And you say we can't afford it. On top of that, we can't afford it, right? Like this level long term is not affordable.
I don't think it's affordable because I also don't see this government taking the fundamental actions that they need to take to fix productivity. Things like capital gains tax reform, corporate tax reform, breaking down competition in highly protected sectors, rapidly reducing and eliminating red tape across the board so it's easier for businesses to start and grow and scale in Canada. Those things are still not being done. And so when I look at the, interest payments on debt, those numbers concern me. There's certainly a narrative from this government that we are investing, we're making capital investments. Those are, not necessarily bad in and of themselves, but if we only spend on those things and we continue to take debt to afford to do those things without also tackling the fundamental reasons that we have low productivity in the country, it doesn't end well in 5, 10, 15 years.
Listen, I've spoken to people this week that are, that they say, hey, you know what, the government's on the right track here. They like what they see, skills training, spending money there. They're happy that the deficit is lower than was expected. But the biggest thing they say to me is, They have faith in Mark Carney. Maybe things don't look good right now, but they say, hey, listen, Mark Carney's an economic genius. We have faith in him. Do you have faith in the Prime Minister?
I do. At many levels, I do. I think I'm still trying to figure out if the rhetoric is going to match reality, or I guess if reality is going to match the rhetoric. I can certainly, from a political perspective, understand how difficult it is to move forward with things in a minority situation. I think I'll have a much clearer sense of whether or not action matches up with the rhetoric by fall 2026 budget. I mean, that'll be there will be 6 months into a majority. And by then it's very clear if, what we're actually seeing being presented to Canadians, represents what the Prime Minister's intention is.
Clock is ticking on that front. Lucy, stick around. There's a couple things I want to get to. I want to talk about the U.S.-Canada Council that Prime Minister Mark Carney has formed to deal with trade negotiations. You had some pointed criticism about the members of that committee. So I want to tackle that and a call that you're making for all business leaders to speak up a bit more. Continuing our chat here with Lucy Hargreaves, the CEO of Build Canada, and we're going to spend the next little while here trying to do just that, build Canada and get us back on the right track here. Lucy, thanks for sticking around.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I want to continue here with you by talking about some criticism that you had when it comes to this Canada-U.S. Economic Relations Committee, okay? And you tweeted this out. Disappointing to see there's not a single founder, startup CEO, tech entrepreneur, venture capital, or innovation economy builder on this committee. And then you really go for the punch here. This is an old economy dinosaur emoji, Lucy. You use the dinosaur emoji to describe the list of people on this committee, okay? We had Flavio Volpe on the show. He is from the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in this country, part of the Ondo industry. I asked him to respond to that perhaps this committee doesn't have the full slate of people it really needs when it comes to Canada-U.S. relations. Have a listen to what he said.
I think she speaks for a constituency that isn't represented on the table, but has access to the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister, and the Chief Negotiator. I think the challenge in a country of 40 million people, and you have an advisory council, how big does it become before it becomes too unwieldy? I think the focus of the council or the committee is I can read it from the outside was which of these industries is carrying the burden of the tariff war. Automobiles, 25% tariff. Steel and aluminum, 50% tariff. Ag industries are being targeted by the Chinese at the same time that the Americans are pushing back against that sphere. It's not, the current trade war is not targeting the service industry. And there are many Canadian sectors that could use a little bit more proactive help from the federal government, but they aren't the target of the current trade war. So, name calling aside.
So there's Flavio Volpe from the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. What do you say to that, Lucy, about the makeup of this advisory committee? I think there have been one change made since you made your comments. So let's tackle that.
Yeah. I mean, first off, I have a great deal of respect for the people who are on the committee. I think those are, great choices. What I was pointing out was the absence of a set of voices, which I think are critical to the conversation. On the point around people having access to PMO and other government ministers, I mean, all of these people who are on this list have incredible access to PMO and government ministers. You just have to look at lobbying records to see that that's the case. And in terms of the committee mandate, look, I know everyone is hyper-focused on the trade war and tariffs. The mandate of the committee is broader than that. However, it is a forum for expertise and strategy. on all aspects of the Canada-US economic relationship. And so I would argue that the innovation economy is an incredibly important part of that Canada-US economic relationship. When we look at the numbers, only 32.4% of Canadian-led high-potential startups in 2024 were headquartered in Canada. 67.6% chose to incorporate elsewhere, mostly the US. Canadian net emigration, so the number of people leaving Canada, hit over 65,000 last year, the highest in 50 years of data collection.
And that's 65,000. What's the makeup of that 65,000? It's
many, many young people. 75% of the University of Waterloo's graduating class of engineers last year moved to the US on graduation. And so every Canadian trained engineer, founder, researcher who moves south is a Canadian taxpayer funded asset transferred to American GDP. And that has to be part of the conversation. It's not to diminish voices like Flavio's and our auto industry. Of course, like, these industries are important industries in Canada. However, Canada needs to have a much more forward-looking 21st century vision for our economy. We cannot only think of ourselves as a resource economy or an auto parts driven economy or an agriculture economy. There is a huge opportunity with the innovation and economy, and to not have those voices at the table in addition to all of these other important voices is a miss.
And Lucy, to that end, I want to highlight, I'll direct all of our listeners to your website, buildcanada.com. You have a memo section. A week ago, you published a memo that is entitled Say It. You start off by saying Canada was built on compromise and politeness, an instinct that helped create the country, but has hardened into a cultural reflex where institutions mistake polite silence for leadership. And now you're calling upon a whole bunch of people who have not been speaking out to start doing so. Let's talk about that. Why this call to say it out loud?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're very polite in this country. We don't say things. We actually have a culture of managed silence. And it's incredibly important in order to make the progress that we need to make, just to be honest with those hard truths that I think a lot of us, probably talk about around kitchen tables with our families and, trusted friends, but we're not saying those things out loud. And that's not good for the long-term prosperity of our country. Do
you think there's like some chilling effects going on here? Because I do see this. I see, every time I see the Shopify guys make a point about where Canada's economy is directed, boy, do they ever get hit with labels, whether it's ones that are rather benign from like tech bros. Other people will label them immediately as right wing or other things, right? Do you think that's what's a part of what's happening here? Anyone who speaks up against, the current direction of the country is immediately labeled in a way that's like, we'll teach them not to open their mouth again.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have tall poppy syndrome. However, I will say that I think the culture is shifting, and I think Build Canada has been a big part of that. There is, some safety in numbers when you have multiple people kind of saying the same thing. And I think the US-Canada Committee is a great example of that. We spoke up last week. I think the fact that we spoke up encouraged others to speak up. And we saw the effect of that, which was that an innovator actually was added to this committee. So Elliot Pence, who is the founder and CEO of Dominion Dynamics, an incredibly innovative defense tech company in this country, was added to the committee. And I think he'll be a strong voice there, not only for defense, but also for the innovation economy and entrepreneur perspective.
Lucy, got to leave it there. Again, I'll tell all of our listeners to head over to your website, buildcanada.com. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Unmistakably Canadian.
It's the music that raised you.
The artists raising the bar.
Hi, this is Brian Adams.
Hey, my name's Brett Emmons. I'm from the Glorious Sons.
Hi, I'm Nelly Furtado.
Made in Canada, the station that champions Canadian music.
Loud, proud, and all yours.
No passports required, just press play.
Tap into Made in Canada now on iHeartRadio.ca
or the free iHeartRadio app.